Thank you guys so very much for joining us today for our conversation on duty, honor, country, a Veterans Day conversation with three incredible people, John Norvell, who will serve as our moderator, Kathy Platoni, and Richard Dick Anderegg. And I think my first interaction with Kathy was just this past week in my very hurried email to Kathy and Dick, and I talked about this conversation with John a while ago, where I said, would you be willing? And right away, the response from all three was yes, and how grateful and thankful they were and I am to be having this conversation today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Chevy Devaney. I'm the Director of Alumni and Alumni Relations, William Smith class of 1995, and the parent of two children here at the colleges. One's a senior and the other is a sophomore. Before we get started with our program, just a few housekeeping for us. This is a wonderful crew, and I know you'll probably have lots of questions coming in. Hopefully, we did receive some earlier. Please use the chat to send us your questions. We'll try to get to those as quickly as we can, and if we don't get to them during this hour, we will certainly respond to you offline. I'll send them all to John, Kathy, and Dick to do that. And please mute your microphones. You are actually mostly all muted. If not, we will keep you muted until that time where maybe John will ask you to release your phone. It depends. We're going to see how this conversation goes. We want it to be as intimate as you want it to be, and as fluid and communal. So I'd like to enlighten this to a very large living room, and every one of us is just kind of chilling and sitting back. But to all the veterans out there, thank you very much for joining us today. So let me jump right in. Our moderator today, John Norvell, is someone I've known for over 20 years, and someone to whom I turn to for advice and counsel on a number of issues of importance regarding history of Hobart and William Smith and gardening, right? So if you don't know, John is a master gardener, and his garden is full of Hobart colors. So, I go to him for lots of advice. So John served in the U.S. Air Force from 1966 to 1989, retired as a lieutenant colonel. A decorated air combat veteran of the Vietnam War. He's a master navigator and weapons system officer with more than 1,000 hours in the F-4 Phantom II, and 400 as an instructor navigator in other jet aircraft. In 1973, that's the year I was born, by the way, as a member of the 13th Tactical Fighter Squadron, Norvell John flew the last unofficial F-4 fighter bombing mission of the Vietnam War to launch from Udon Royal Thai Air Force Base. He served as assistant professor of history at the Air Force Academy, and later as alumni director at Hobart William Smith until 2002. I actually met John shortly before he retired and was very grateful for that. And while a student at Hobart, he was a member of the Druids, Canterbury Club, and the Echo and Pine yearbook staff. When I started in this role a little over a year ago, John asked me to never forget the sacrifices of the alums who served our country, and to think about ways through which we, as Hobart and William Smith, might continue to engage and support this community. This conversation is about one way through which we will recognize, thank, and support you. And to our panelists once again, and to all of those joining us, thank you very much. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation in each other's company this afternoon. John?
Okay, well, I'm going to put on my professorial hat for a couple minutes and talk about a little military history for those of you who are not steeped in the military history. There is an American way of war. In fact, I taught a whole class on it at the Air Force Academy, but I'm going to boil it down to two things today. First of all, the American way of war revolved around having a small military establishment. Now, you may find this hard to believe right now, but this large military presence that we maintain throughout the world really has only come about in the lifetime of most of the people on this screen that we're talking to today. Prior to that, the United States always had a very small military establishment. And there are a number of reasons why. First of all, the British used their standing army to to subjugate the colonies. And the American colonists never forgot the role that the redcoats played in putting down their independence, even to the point of quartering redcoats in the homes of the colonists. So that when the Constitution was written, it was written in mind to keep the army small, basically, and under control of the civilians. And so through most of the 19th century, we saw the army really, really very small, only used in a sort of a peacekeeping role for the most part on the frontier. That's not to say we didn't have a professional officer corps. We did. There were graduates of West Point and Annapolis that led the troops, but they were a small group indeed on the frontier. Only until after the Civil War did that begin to change. And what did the United States rely on? It relied on the Navy. So if you're a Navy vet out there, you were the primary defender of the United States. Why? Because we were an island continent. We had two big oceans on either side of us. We didn't fear our neighbors to the north or the south. We really didn't need a strong army. And secondly, this small army, which was professionally led, if it did need troops, it went to what we called citizen soldiers. That was an old custom in the American military, right from the start of the Revolution, putting together small militias to take on the British. That continued through the Civil War, when volunteer units were recruited throughout the country to serve both North and South. And in today, we still have the citizen soldier in the form of the National Guard. Well, so those things are the two bases of the way we operated and the way we operate today. And every veteran that's out there, and the ones that are on this program today, are all citizen soldiers. They're people who, when they heard the call for whatever reason, put down their civilian occupations, joined the military to serve their nation, and then they went home again to take up life in their communities. And that's a very, very, very much American way of doing things. So that brings us to the question of veterans. Everybody's a veteran that's on this call for the most part. Hobart William Smith has a strong tradition of veterans and veteran involvement in the colleges. I could almost guarantee that the men that met in 1822 with Bishop Hobart all had ties to the War of 1812. It would be very hard not for us to think that they didn't. In the Civil War, about 80 alums fought. We know that 7 of them were in the Confederate forces as officers. In World War I, about a third of Hobart went off to war, about 300 men, 10 of which we know were ambulance drivers in about 1917. In World War II, 1,400 alums and faculty and William Smith students also went off and served. After the war, we had a huge influx of GIs that came back on the GI Bill. Probably the most familiar ones that you can think of are the Saga founders, who were back at Hobart to get their education and did very well from their time. But even during the war, there were male students on campus through the Navy V-12 program, which was a officer training program that brought about 1,000 men through the campus at a time when the colleges probably would have gone under without military support. And later, the ROTC program probably touched close to 5,000 Hobart men over the 20-year period it was in existence. Because every year for those 20 years, at least 250 students were involved with it. And some years probably more than that, because it would have been the first 2 years. So maybe even close to 10,000 when I think about it now that I'm thinking about it. So that basically sets us up to get into our own careers. Somebody asked me and of course the other panelists how Hobart and William Smith prepared us for the military. Well, as a history major, it gave me a good background for the career I would end up in as a navigator, because it taught me to think logically and to be well prepared and organized. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my career. Chevy's already outlined it. And if I were to call my career anything, it would be the adventures of R2-D2 and the F4. Now, you may be wondering why I refer to myself as R2-D2. And it's not for the reasons you probably are thinking about. When I went on active duty, I had first gone to graduate school at Syracuse to get my master's degree. And during that period of time, my vision got bad and I couldn't qualify for pilot training anymore. So the Air Force, in its infinite wisdom, as we all know from dealing with military personnel, decided they were going to make me a security police officer. So they sent me to Bolling Air Force Base in February 1968 to report to the 1100 Security Police Squadron as one of their officers. Well, this, unbeknownst to me, was the Air Force Honor Guard. And all the people who know me know I would not say I'm a big, tall, strapping honor guard type. I'm built like R2-D2. And so if you want to vision what it was like when I walked in the door of that captain's office, you can imagine the head of the Imperial Stormtroopers sitting behind his desk, and in rolls R2-D2. I was assigned to the Air Force Honor Guard for about 25 minutes. And then they had to do something with me. So they assigned me to the base command post. And for the next 3 years, I was an operations planner. And I worked in Bolling's command post. Now, some people might consider this as probably a career killing move, and it actually would have been. But somebody had long ago told me that whenever you're in an opportunity, whenever you get into a job, look for opportunities that'll give you a better way to help the Air Force. And during that period, every chance I got, I pushed to get back into flying because I knew if I'd stayed there, it would have been the end of my career. And as it was, the fates intervened in 1971. The Air Force was desperate for blind navigators. And so I went to nav school. I did well. I ended up in the backseat of the F4. And as they say in Paul Harvey, that's page 2 of the story. My career went in many different directions from that point on. But had I stayed in that command post, I know it would have been over in 4 years. So I'll turn it over to Kathy. Why don't you tell us a little about your career, maybe something you've gained from your time in the service?
Well, my route to the military was a little bit different. After graduation in '74, I moved to Miami, Florida to get my master's in counseling psychology, and I was very, very bored and just wanted to go ahead and get my doctorate, and that just wasn't in the cards. Well, as it turned out, I finally got accepted to Nova Southeastern University in Davie, Florida, and had no way to pay for it. So I applied for an Army scholarship. Being in the military was about as far away from my thought process as could possibly be. Not in my scope, but they paid for my doctorate in its entirety, and I owe them 4 years, and I will make my 40th year of military service next year. So it really appealed to my sense of adventure. So off I went to William Beaumont Army Medical Center after I finished my doctorate to complete my internship. And since that time, most of my career was in the reserves. I did 5 years of active duty and then joined the reserves. And that's when things got very, very interesting. Over the course of my military service as a citizen soldier, I deployed 4 times. Operation Desert Storm, stateside, treating the troops returning from the combat theater. And then in 2003, I was deployed to Joint Task Force Guantanamo Bay as the commander of a small combat stress detachment for a year. As soon as I got back, it was off to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom for a year. And that's when things really got very interesting. I was exposed to a considerable amount of combat, worked with the Army and Marines extensively. I was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division, so where they went, I went. Saw some pretty horrific things, but built a very strong family of fellow soldiers that I'm still surrounded with. Upon returning from Iraq, went back to work in my practice, and lo and behold, came the orders for Afghanistan. So went out to Wisconsin to join my new unit, and we spent about 3 or 4 months with pre-mobilization training, which was really infantry training, and ultimately ended up at Fort Hood for the final phase of our mobilization training. I am a survivor of the Fort Hood massacre, as many of my classmates know. A month after the Fort Hood massacre, where we lost 5 of our own soldiers with 13 wounded, we were very wounded, but we weren't going to let the shooter win that battle, which was to shut down the mission to deploy. So we made it through our year-long deployment, returning in late 2010 and back to the reserve side of the house. Very sadly, because of age and the drawdown, I was forcibly retired in 2013. I felt like I lost my sense of belongingness in my family, but lo and behold, the Ohio Military Reserve, which is State Defense Forces, contacted me. So I've given 5 more years. I retired with 34 years, and this is my 39th year. So I've been blessed with a very long military career, and it's probably the greatest honor of my life. And I probably learned more about a sense of rising to every challenge and developing that sense of adventure and that adrenaline rush at Hobart and William Smith, where I spent probably 2 years on disciplinary probation for all of my antics. Yeah, my father was so proud. But hey, that worked in my military career quite a bit. Through my military career, I learned how to be a writer, so I've published widely about war trauma, about PTSD, co-authored 2 books about war trauma, hoping to get a 3rd out there one of these days about the Fort Hood massacre. And the rest is page 2 of history, as you said. I am a clinical psychologist in private practice. I also provide services, and this is part of my adrenaline junkiness. I provide services for 25 police departments as of today. I just picked up my 25th. I'm actually on Dayton SWAT, so I've been in the trenches with the police quite a bit. I go to all the call outs and train with Dayton SWAT. So again, that appeals to my military sense of order and discipline and being in the trenches and getting dirty with all the boys.
Dick, you're up.
Am I on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you could join us today. The first thing I want to say is that I hope you're all well and you're all safe. The most important thing facing us today is the pandemic, and I'm hoping that all of you out there are being careful. I looked at and that I hope that the tragedy of this hasn't touched any of you too deeply, and if it has, my sincerest condolences to you. I graduated from Hobart. In the morning, I got commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant out of the Air Force ROTC program. And the day after that, Gene Sutherland, class 67, and I were married in the St. John's Chapel. And off I went to Air Force pilot training. I came right out of pilot training, went into F4 training, same airplane that John flew, and went straight to a combat tour flown out of Thailand in support of the Vietnam War. I spent the next 30 years in the Air Force on active duty. I had 5 overseas assignments, Thailand, England, Okinawa, Germany, and the Philippines. So just about almost half of my time in the Air Force was spent outside of the US. I finished my last 2 years in the Air Force as the commander of Air Force ROTC in Pittsburgh, which seemed like a nice bookend to me at the time. It was a fantastic job working with the young people that were coming to the Air Force. And if we did Air Force ROTC in college the way we do it in high school with retirees, I'd still be there. Very much enjoyed that job. It was one of the best jobs I had in my 30 years. I retired in 97. I worked for Rand Corporation for a few years, and then I came back to the Air Force in civil service. And I was the Air Force Director of History and Museums for the Air Force Worldwide for the next 10 years. The question that I get most asked when I talk about my time in the Air Force is, don't you miss flying? Well, not really. I got an opportunity to do just about everything in a fighter. I flew F-15s the second half of my time in the Air Force. I got to do just about everything that you could do. The thing that I do miss about being in the Air Force is the people. The people are the fantastic people, working together with a common goal, working together for a common mission. Very dedicated, very loyal, hardworking, very bright, and an Air Force career. I know it doesn't sound like that when we all sit here on this thing and talk about all the years, decades that we spent, but most people spend a 20-year career. And so after that 20-year career, if they enlisted at 18, they're now 38. If they were commissioned at 21, they're now 41 or 42. And they have a whole second career ahead of them after that. John had his second career at the colleges. I had my second career with Rand Corporation and also with the history program. And we bring veterans, and all of you out, most of you out there listening today are veterans, and you know that you bring those skill sets that you learned in the military into those new jobs that you have. So I'm very proud to be here. I'm proud to be a Hobart grad. I've got my Hobart tie on, if you can't tell that in the video. Yeah, there's another one. And proud of my time there and all the time that I spent in the Air Force, growing up in the Air Force.
Okay, thank you, Dick and Kathy. Someone posed a question, which I'm going to attempt to answer. What would Major Ted Shorak have said about service? Now, that's kind of a tricky thing because we only viewed Ted as young men and as students, but a couple of years ago, I wrote about Ted for the local paper. I want to read what I wrote about him, and then I'll tell you what I think, how Ted would have talked about service. Ted was one of my ROTC instructors at Hobart in the 1960s. If there were ever a man who exemplified what it meant to be a good officer, it was Ted. He had the military bearing and positive attitude that motivated young men. Ted was approachable and counseled all the Hobart men who went to him for advice and help, whether they were in ROTC or not. Further, he was active in the Geneva community, and he was well liked by his neighbors. One of his neighbor's sons remembered flying with Ted. He wrote, "My parents' friends were Ted and Alva Shorak. My older brother and I remember him fondly as he gave us our first airplane ride. I was 10 at the time, and he took us to the local airport and rented a small airplane and took us around the pattern a few times. He might as well have hung the moon in the sky for me." Ted had flown the F-84 and F-101 fighters. He was a pilot's pilot. And more importantly, Ted led by example. As Vietnam heated up, he volunteered for service there, and he left Hobart in the fall of '65 to fly missions in the A-1 Sky Raider in Southeast Asia. The following year, I was set to graduate on June 12, 1966. On June 9th, we received the news that Ted had been shot down or had been lost over Vietnam. To me, his loss brought home the realization that war could touch ordinary lives. Ted had been a mentor to me and others. He'd given us the confidence in our abilities and encouraged us to pursue an Air Force career. I often think of Ted and I say, well done. Here was a man who was a prime example of duty, honor, and country. And that's how I think Ted would have illustrated service. Ted would have shown dedication, as Dick mentioned. He would have shown trust, and he would have been a prime example of loyalty, not just to the men below him or the men above him, but to his country and giving his life. So let's open it up for a little bit of a discussion of duty, honor, and country. Those are big terms. And when I was teaching the cadets, it was always very difficult to get these concepts across to them because these words are so big. There's no doubt about it. I've offered three alternate words: dedication, trust, and loyalty, because in many ways they illustrate the same points. So if Kathy or Dick would like to jump in, we can begin our discussion on duty, honor, and country.
Oh, I like to look at duty, honor, and country as kind of sacred words. They kind of tell us what we can be, what we ought to be, what occasions we can rise to. Kind of a rallying point to build courage of conviction and courage to do what you never thought you could do. It's facing your fear and doing it anyway. I think, as we all know, rising to a higher purpose and becoming a part of something so much larger than the self almost has an addictive quality to it once you step into that realm, and to be part of that force that are custodians of our national defense and of our basic freedoms is an enormous thing. And once you put on that uniform, there's a feeling that comes with it that's so all-encompassing. It's just about the greatest thing I've ever been able to do in my life, which is to serve our country and to really be invested in our basic freedoms. The real heroes, as I always say, are not just the ones that defend our freedoms, but they're the ones that never made it back and made the ultimate sacrifice. We are the lucky ones who have come back to tell the tale.
I also had my first ride on an airplane from Ted Shorak. And I just had 1 year of overlap with him in the class that he taught. Yeah, I think that he epitomized how I visualize an Air Force officer. I do want to say that when I came into the Air Force as a second lieutenant in 1967, I had a general concept of what duty meant, what honor meant, what country meant. My initial plan was never to stay in the Air Force. I had planned to go into the Air Force, become a pilot, get an Air Force airplane that's called a KC-135 tanker. It's the same thing as a Boeing 707 jetliner was back in the 60s. Spend my 4-year commitment as a pilot to the Air Force and then go become a commercial pilot. That never happened because as I grew in those initial years in the Air Force, the concept of excellence and especially the concept of service above self became a very real value to me. The Air Force doesn't particularly say anymore duty, honor, country. It says excellence in all we do, integrity first, excellence in all we do, and service before self. Those values really started to mean something to me. And I saw that they meant a lot to the people that were around me. And that was kind of a self-feeding thing that was important to me as I grew into that. And it all started back in Hobart ROTC because it gave me the impetus to go find out what this was all about. And as I found out what it was about, I found out that I liked it more and more all the time. That's it for me.
Which of the three do you think are the most important? Kathy, do you have one of the three words that really jumps out at you that strikes you as the most important? Duty, honor, country?
You know, I see them as one, but perhaps honor is I guess honor is the one that stands out the most. I think the most honorable thing I've ever been asked to do is to serve my country in time of war, and to put everything about my own wonderful life back home aside, to do something far more important, to try to save the souls of so many soldiers in the combat theater, and to become brothers and sisters with everyone that crossed my path. And nothing is more honorable than that. Even though I often like to say country, not ourselves, I think honor, you're right, that is the one that stands out the most.
How about you, Dick? What do you think?
I agree with that. You know, I've always considered, after I got old enough and smart enough to actually give it some serious adult consideration, I always considered myself a citizen first and an Air Force officer second. You know, we swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, and so that is your first priority as opposed to yourself. But I think honor is very important, highly, and probably the most important of the three. As I used to say to my young officers when I would counsel them, and cadets later on when I was an Air Force ROTC commander, the thing that you have to be prepared for in any career, and it doesn't matter whether it's a military career or as a banker or a lawyer or whatever, your integrity will be tested every single day. Every day.
So true.
Now, sometimes you will fall short, and sometimes you will rise above. And it's from the falling shorts and the rising above that you grow as a human being and you grow as an individual, and you learn what your limits are and what you can live with. But those things are very important, and that's all part of honor. But and Boy, if you were to ask any returned POW what they said, they'll tell you honor, because that's what kept them together, because they had no contact with country and they had no duty except to be a POW, but they had honor, and their motto was return with honor. And I think it's an important one. Yeah.
Well, I hate to be repetitious, but I agree with you entirely. It's interesting that having been in both worlds, civilian and military, that you find the honor to be so important, because you often don't see it, I hate to say it, in the civilian community. But when you're in combat and when you're dealing with people in the military and they tell you they're going to do something, you believe them. You don't question it. You take their word, and very seldom are you let down. So I agree, honor is very important. Chevy, do you have a question that anybody has posed that you'd like to share with us?
I do. Bill just sent in a question that says, there is an assessment of today's younger people that there is not a feeling of duty, honor, or service to the country. Look at people who disrespect the US flag. The flag represents everything who we are as citizens. How do you feel on today's situations?
Oh, boy.
Well, I'll go first, and I'll say that's an extension of what I just said. I think when you're young, it's difficult to have a complete understanding of what those kinds of things mean, and until you get some life experience. I mean, I've had many people during my time that would be visiting the base, or people from downtown that were out to visit the base, and they're getting to know the young airmen, and they would turn to me and say, where do you find these people? And my answer to that always was, we don't find them, we make them, right? We take somebody that's qualified into the military, and we train them, and we teach them, and we lead them, and we get some pretty good products out of it, I think. But it doesn't surprise me when a young person that's 15 or 16 or 17 or even older than that, in their 20s, disrespects the nation, disrespects the flag, disrespects whatever. Hell, that's what I fought for, so they can do that, right? But there has to be an opportunity to learn and grow and understand what these things mean to you in adulthood.
I think because we no longer in our classrooms from elementary school on say the Pledge of Allegiance and have a moment of silence and sing the national anthem, I think we've lost some of our feelings of patriotism, well, in a very big way. I mean, that was so important every day up until I graduated high school. It really hurts to see people taking a knee. I think it's time we get on our knees. I think that the value of, or what comes about as a result of military service and being patriotic and believing in our country and what we stand for, and being willing to stand up and fight for that, are sometimes lost on our youth. Well, and I think it happened to us as well. We grew into it, and we were molded into something so much better by our experiences and our leaders. But I think there's been a real downturn in our belief in what we stand for, starting in kindergarten and all the way up. It's very disappointing to see how the media portrays those who are free to disrespect our flag and our national anthem. I could go on and on and on about that, but yeah, that probably would not be a good idea.
I'd like to jump in here then, because I already told Chevy and John that one of the points that I wanted to make was about a couple of points about family. But the first one I'm going to make about family is just to relate to all of you that when I was flying in combat in Vietnam, my sister was metaphorically putting daisies down gun barrels. And she was in protests and protest parades and whatever. In fact, her daughter is watching this thing right now as we speak. My sister and I danced around this issue for many years until we finally came to an understanding. And here was what the understanding was. The understanding was that I would respect her decision to be a patriot in the way she thought she should be a patriot, if she would respect my decision to be a patriot the way I thought I needed to be a patriot. And so that's the understanding that we came to. And that's all I've ever wanted. I've never wanted anybody to come pat me on the back. I've never ever wanted anybody to say, well, you were a great airman and all that sort of thing. All I ever wanted from my nation was respect for the decision that I made. That's all I ever wanted. And we have that now, and that's great. But, you know, if someone wants to, I'm going to disagree with you on this, Kathy. If somebody wants to take a knee in a football game, they can take a knee in a football game. I don't really care. They're expressing what they think is the best thing that they can do for their country and their community and whatever. And you know what? If I don't like it, I can change the channel. I can do a lot of different things. But we fought hard for this. You know, Americans are cantankerous. Americans are difficult to get along with. They're opinionated, and they value their freedom and their individuality above almost anything else. I just want, as a military man, to provide them the opportunity to do that in a safe environment, right? That's what I want. So my sister and I came to this agreement, and it was a great thing that we did. It took a while to get there, and I don't even remember who suggested it, but it was sure the right thing. I respect your right to be a patriot the way you see it, as long as you respect my right to be a patriot the way I see it.
Well said.
I'll add just a little bit to that, and just from a slightly different perspective. A lot of Americans really have no clue what the military is about. There's no doubt about it. And these younger people may very well be in that boat, that they don't understand what it's like to be in the military, nor do they understand what it's like to be in war. I think I've seen various statistics, but one of them was that less than 1% of the American people have any sort of concept of being in war. And all of us have been in that position. So it's probably a lack of education in many minds, that they really don't understand what we have gone through. And as Dick said the other day when we were sort of talking through this, we don't understand what it's like to be a fireman, and we don't know other people's jobs. So it's sort of behooves all of us to make people aware that being in the military isn't just being an honor guard officer marching in Washington, that sometimes you do put your life on the line. Every time you strap on an F4 or an F-15, you put your life on the line. There's no guarantee that you're going to come back. And that's what sets us apart in many ways from a lot of professions, that you kiss your wife goodbye and there's no guarantee that she's going to see you that night. So it's an educational process to make people aware of there are costs to serving the country as well as benefits.
John, Tom has a question for us as well.
Yeah, I'd like to say a word. Thank you. What you've said, Dick and John and Kathy, has been elegant in many ways. I have an additional perspective, maybe adding on to what you've already talked about, but in a different way. I'm a commander of the American Legion in West Hampton Beach, New York, Eastern Long Island, having served at the time of Vietnam, but only stateside in the U.S. Army. And what has happened out here in this town, it's patriotism extended. And it's more of a practical example, I think, of what some goodness is about, how people now feel more good, positive about the military. What I want to say is that working with the mayor and councilman of this village, which is about 10,000 in the summer, but it's in sort of a high profile Hamptons area, we built a military park, and it was the honor of a World War II veteran. And it has the Army, Navy, the Marines, and it has all the Six Flags, and it's near the marina. And the village contributed a lot. We put some money into it. It took about 1.5 years to get this thing done. But the results are wonderful in terms of recognition. That is a Memorial Day. We just had a celebration, a memorial celebration, Veterans Day. We did it on Sunday to get even more people. But we get really a number of surrounding citizens, young and old, coming when we have events. And when we started with this Memorial Park, we had the U.S. representative from our area, Congress, come. And we have a number of veterans in the area, and they highly support us. And we didn't really have that before, but by putting this park physically together, and people have their benches, they can sit, they can, it's near the water, so it's a nice scene. It's lit 24 hours a day, basically. It's really been wonderful. It's an addition, and it's all about the military. And so good things can come, and it sometimes takes longer in areas you don't think are going to happen. And I'm very proud that I can tell you this, because I think it's really a wonderful addition to the community.
Thank
So,
you.
anyway, thank you, Dick and Kathy, and
Thank
everybody who's
you.
serving.
Thank you.
No matter what your age is now or what your feelings are, thank you for being here also on this discussion.
Thank you.
Is this
Very refreshing to hear that.
since he was just talking about families, is this where I can make my pitch on families? Is that okay? When we talk about the military, outside of the people who are in the military, we have a view of a soldier, an airman, a sailor, a Coast Guardsman, a Marine, right? Every one of those people that we view that are serving the military have a family that's with them. It might be a brother or a sister or a mom and dad if they're young and they're not in the military member isn't married yet, or if they're married, it's their spouse and their children that are with them. And oftentimes, these families make greater sacrifices than what the actual military member makes, and have greater stressors put on them than what you could possibly imagine. And I'm just going to give you one quick example. My wife, Jean, who I mentioned earlier, is an Army brat from great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and brother, all career Army officers. And during the Vietnam War, her brother, her father, and her husband, that'd be me, we were all in the war at the same time. All right, all three of us were there at the same time. Now, you just put yourself in her shoes and her mother's shoes, right? Of what this meant to have the father, the brother, and the husband all in the war at the same time. So there are these tremendous stressors that are on families. Our families, our military families, serve every much as we, the military members do. They serve in a different way, but they serve.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Dick.
Yes.
Periodically, I will refer to Bonnie and I being in the military together, and that's just the way we felt. We were in the military.
It's a 2-for-1 deal. They pay you, but they get both of you.
That's right. Exactly.
Both my husband and I are in the military. John, who's listening in, John Hutchinson, and I think you two know each other, was a navigator for many years, 25 years active duty Air Force, was a navigator aboard George Bush Sr.'s aircraft, flying diplomatic missions with the 89th MAS, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So we both made a lot of sacrifices. He made the greater sacrifice with my 4 deployments. You live with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. You have no contact for many, many months on end, in some cases years on end, and dealing with the unknowns and never knowing if your loved one is coming back or not. I know John probably had a parade every time I left, at least he tells me that. I know that these were very difficult times for him, and all of the pieces that he had to pick up and manage while I was gone were
Yeah,
extraordinary.
hi, I'm sort of waiting to hear back about my chair. I think it should have been done by what you said.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Little side note, and often family members don't get back what they sent to war because nobody comes back unscathed. So my husband is an absolute blessing in what he has tolerated. And me being a combat veteran, and he being a very long-standing veteran of 25 years of active service to the Air Force and to our country. So you're right about families, Dick, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to what you were just saying. When I was in Thailand, I was roomed, when we were doing combat missions, I was roomed with a young lieutenant. I was an old guy. I didn't get to NAV training until I was 28, so I was a lot older than, than most of my contemporaries flying combat. And this poor guy, I mean, we lived together, we flew missions and stuff, but he was just barely making ends meet, and his wife was barely making ends meet. Lieutenant, even on flying status, I bet he wasn't making more than $900 a month total. And they were splitting that between them, maintaining two households. My wife and I were maintaining two households. That's what people don't understand. If you're overseas, and particularly if you're an officer, nothing's free. At least it wasn't when I was in. You pay for your food, you pay for your clothing, it's all coming out of your pocket. Meanwhile, your wife is home or you're with the family and she's paying for things too. So there's a great monetary stress that comes about. Sadly, this young man who I lived with for a year, when he got home, he and his wife divorced. It was just too much. They just had too many strains on their marriages. And you mentioned PTSD, and that might be a good time for you, Kathy, to talk a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder, because I'm firmly convinced, having been in combat, that everybody is touched by combat. I've read about combat, I've thought about combat. As a military historian, I've talked with people about their experiences, and there isn't a person I haven't ever talked to that hasn't been changed one way or another. Sometimes not much, sometimes greatly. So I'm giving
Yes.
you a good lead in.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, you don't come back the same. You see, feel, hear, smell, touch things that nobody else should ever have to. And that's what we do. When you're exposed to that much trauma, particularly seeing comrades wounded, maimed, and killed, it changes you. PTSD is actually a brain injury because you're exposed to so much trauma, usually, that it changes the way your brain processes all that incoming information. You get stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze response, and everything begins to feel like the war zone. Those of us who have PTSD find the world a very threatening place. We do not trust easily. We isolate ourselves because we can't trust. We're angry all the time because we have isolated ourselves. We've lost our Army buddies or our Air Force buddies. We've lost our sense of belongingness. And when we come home, we've also lost the flavor of war, which is very addictive. We've often lost our way because what gives us so much value, meaning, and purpose is no longer there. We also come home to a country that really doesn't understand what it is, as we talked about, to serve in the military and to be in combat. Less than 1% of the American populace at this point serves in the military. So finding a listening ear and finding people who are really willing to understand your plight and understand your experience is a tough road, very much so. PTSD is rampant among war veterans, much more so than is reported in the media, still dealing with, or in the research, because people are afraid to come forward. PTSD is a brain injury. It is not a psychological disorder. It's a psychological injury. And getting past that often opens doors to getting help. But I think the best help comes from veterans themselves because of that camaraderie and that sense of belonging to something that's more important than yourself.
It's interesting that you're talking about that, because in my own family, my great-grandfather was a Marine lieutenant in the halls of Montezuma, and he was also a colonel at Gettysburg, and he turned to alcohol in life to deal with all of this. And alcohol is a great self-medicator, as we all know, and many people use it. And I know in combat, many a night there are people in the bar who are dealing with what they've gone through during the day. So it's one of those outward signs of difficulties that people
Yes. Trying not to feel. We didn't have alcohol. Well, we weren't supposed to have alcohol in the combat theater, but I saw a lot of it come in shampoo bottles and other forms. Oh yeah, you will have that. But coming home, yes. Turning to alcohol to numb yourself out and not to feel is an enormous problem, as is suicide. There are more veterans and military personnel that take their lives by suicide than have died in combat in recent years. So we're doing something wrong or not doing enough right.
I'll also piggyback off of something you said, and I know that Dick in his combat time experienced this. I was flying right up till the end of the bombing missions in Southeast Asia. And then after they ended, just like you said, we didn't really know what to do with ourselves.
What comes next?
Yeah, we were ready to go north. If they'd said go north, we would have gone the next day. But we sat around for the next 6 months with no gasoline to run the airplanes because it was during the big gas crisis in
Yes.
73. So I was getting maybe 2 missions a month after having been flying maybe 30 missions in a row per month. And it took its toll on people for that reason.
Yes. You lose your ground.
Yeah.
So, which allows maybe a segue to some things that are happening for veterans that are good news. One of the things that I've been doing for the last 6 or 8 years, serving on the Secretary of Defense's commission to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, which the official dates of the Vietnam War are November 1st, 1955 to 1975. So it's a 20-year span. So we've got 5 more years left on this commemoration. Now, the objective of this commemoration is not to glorify or justify in any way the Vietnam War. The objective is purely and simply to thank veterans and their families that served in the military during Vietnam, whether they actually served in Vietnam or not. This is some 9 million people served in the military, US military, during that 20-year period. The staff at the Pentagon that works under our umbrella has set up some 3,800 commemorative partners around the United States. And Tom, I thought maybe you were going to say your American Legion Post was one of them, but these organizations, Walmart, huge companies and small organizations commit to making a thank you event twice a year. And so far, there are 6.4 million Vietnam veterans still living of the 9 million that served. And they've gotten to half of them and said a thank you to them in some way and their families, both in one way or another through these commemorative events across the nation. And you can go to the website, Vietnam 50th commemoration, VN 50th commemoration, and you can see what's all been done.
Thank you for your involvement in that.
Yes, we have a couple more questions in the chat, John, if I can get those to you or get that to the panel. You okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. This one is from Sarah. She says, what does patriotism look like in 2020? Is we're in a mass patriotic, or does it need to be separated from politics?
I'm not smart enough to answer that.
And so of course that's one of the questions, right, Sarah? Like, do I pose this? Do I ask this question? But I think it's something that that's an individual, right? That's really up to us to respond to that in our own way and think about this. But it is one of those scary questions to put out there. But I did not want to not ask that question, at least for folks to think about.
I mean it with all respect. I think it is something, as you guys were talking about your experience, being a young person that hasn't seen war and hasn't, I have family members that have served, and but I've not directly seen that. And how can I be a patriot, and how can I support military and military families in 2020? And you hear this rhetoric that wearing a mask is patriotic. And I'm curious, I hope I'm not offending at all, but just curious if you feel that, and that's something that we can do at home to serve. That seems like a very small word in comparison to what you all have sacrificed. But I hope the intention is coming across in that question.
Sarah,
We have an answer for that. Oh, Jean. Hi, Jean.
I have an answer for that. Yes, it is patriotic to wear a mask. Our country depends on our health, and our health depends on how we act as citizens. And until we all embrace that wearing a mask is patriotic, I believe that we're not going to advance in the cause of taking care of each other. So, are you a William Smith?
Yes, I am William Smith 15.
Yay!
Hey, Sarah, I agree totally with you. I've sat here very quietly and listened, but I think it is patriotic. I think there are so many ways that we as citizens can demonstrate patriotism. And everybody will choose their own way, but I think that's one. So I'll unmute now, except I do.
Well said, Sarah.
We also
Very
have
well
another,
said. And Jean.
we have another one from Bill as well, John. Would you like me to read that now? And
Let me just say one thing. Patriotism is like duty, honor, and country. It's a big word. And they're all different ways to interpret those words. And again, it's like a spectrum of options. You can show the flag every day in your home, which is what I do. And you can help out at the local VA by even being a greeter when the guys come in who need help. I mean, there are many ways you can show your patriotism. And wearing a mask, I agree. That's one of the ways to do it.
There you go.
Bill's question is, should young people at some point after high school or college be required to serve the nation as military, teachers, Peace Corps, etc.?
Universal.
Love that idea.
I think it's a great idea.
I think it goes
Doesn't
back
have
to
to
the
be
idea of,
doesn't have to be the military. There are lots of European nations that do this. That's very successful. It's very successful. I don't think we'll ever see it in America unless things remain dramatically changed because of our adherence on individuality. And no, you're not going to tell me I have to do that. However, I think universal service is a great idea. Financially, economically, socially, all those reasons. I'll stop. I think it's a great idea. My vote is yes.
I vote yes as well. Peace Corps, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Job Corps, whatever. Serve your nation, serve your fellow citizens in some way, shape, or form. It will teach you an appreciation for life like none other.
you know, it's a very old idea in America. It's called noblesse oblige. To those that are given much, something's expected in return. Americans are a very rich country with many blessings, and everyone should give back.
Yes.
We are at the 4:30 mark. And I wonder, John, if you'd like to wrap up, if Dick, Kathy, you have any parting words, and then I'd just like to say one thing. And actually, I have a student on the line who would also like to thank you or say something before we go. So,
Well, I will only say in passing that because Chevy has referred to us as heroes. We are not heroes. We are simply people who did our jobs. That's my closing.
That's right. And continue to serve. Doesn't get any better than that. And I want to thank everybody who made this forum, this roundtable discussion possible. This was just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to celebrate military service on this wonderful day. And thank you for all of those who cared enough to listen in. I so appreciate this. I so appreciate Hobart and William Smith. I'm so proud to be an alum. Thank you all very, very much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Carly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carling. I'm a current senior at Hobart and William Smith. I'm here in Geneva in the Odell's Village, if anyone knows of that, living residence. But I'm from Sarasota, Florida. I'm studying economics and international relations. But I joined on this call because I just wanted to show my appreciation and listen to some discourse about this. My father was in the Marine Corps. He was a lieutenant colonel. He flew the attack Cobra helicopters. So I very much appreciate the military and everything that service members have done to serve our country. So I really just wanted to just quickly say thank you. And I know we were talking about young people before, but there are some of us out here. I know I can't speak for everyone, but just know that I appreciate it. I really respect everyone who goes and serves. So thank you, and happy Veterans Day. I appreciate you all.
Tell your daddy Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Hey, can you tell she's one of our stars? We love Carling. And as an immigrant, and Sherry Best is on the call, and I remember when I got my citizenship, she had a red, white, and blue cake with the American flag on it for me. Do you remember that, Sherry, in the old alumni house? And I've come to learn about and appreciate you all and what you've done to make this country a safe place for me to be, right? And a place for me to raise my family. And so I'm, again, incredibly appreciative to all of you here, to Kathy, to John, and to Dick for saying yes to my email request last week. By the way, folks, I just want to reiterate that 1 week to have this conversation, to show our appreciation to you all, that the colleges care about you and your community and this community, and that you'll help me continue to do work like this to extend our thanks and gratitude to you. So thank you so very much for joining us for this hour and for this wonderful opportunity to say thanks.
Thank you, Chevy, for putting this together. Wonderful job. Thanks all. Happy Veterans Day.
Thank you.
Thank you all for serving.
Yes,
Thank you all for serving.
Thank you.
Thank you for supporting.
In a big way. Yes.